There is a very specific category of locked door that exists beyond the reach of ordinary human curiosity. Not the kind you can photograph from a distance and call it research. Not the kind you can file a Freedom of Information request for and receive, eventually, a response. These are doors backed by governments, by militaries, by legal authorities who have written the words "deadly force authorized" into documents that no journalist has ever read in full. 15 places on this planet sit inside that category. They are not simply dangerous, they are guarded, actively, continuously, and in several cases for reasons that the institutions responsible have never fully explained to the public, paying for the guards. Some hold the most destructive objects ever manufactured by human hands. Some hold secrets about events that shaped the modern world and whose details remain classified decades after anyone involved is still alive to protect. Some are guarded not by soldiers with standing orders, but by forces far older and far less negotiable than any human law. The American missionary who walked onto North Sentinel Island in 2018 believed he could change minds. He did not come back. The contractors who patrol the perimeter of a dry lake bed in the Nevada desert have never been required to explain themselves. They never have been. These are 15 places that the world's most powerful institutions have decided you do not need to see, and several of them have decided that with considerable force. Entry 1. North Sentinel Island, India. Right now, there are Indian Coast Guard vessels patrolling a 3 nautical mile exclusion zone around a 23 square mile island in the Bay of Bengal. Their orders have not changed in 50 years. Nobody goes in. Nobody comes out. The island is called North Sentinel, and the people who live there have occupied that land for approximately 60,000 years. They have never permitted contact with the outside world, and the Indian government has decided to enforce that wish with the full authority of the state. In November of 2018, an American missionary named John Olin Chow arranged transportation to the island's shoreline. He believed he had a divine calling. He had been warned by the Indian government, by anthropologists, by every authority who knew what North Sentinel was. The fishermen who dropped him off watched from their boat. The Sentinelese responded with arrows. Chow's body was buried on the island where he fell. The Indian Coast Guard recovered it several days later. No arrests were made. Under Indian law, the Sentinelese had committed no crime. What makes this island different from every other location on this list is that the danger is not a chemical, a radiation field, or a classified military program. The danger is an entire civilization that has chosen, for 60,000 consecutive years past, to reject the outside world entirely. India guards this island not to protect outsiders from the island. It guards it to protect the island from outsiders. A single introduced pathogen, influenza, measles, the common cold, could destroy a population with no acquired immunity to any of it. The entire Sentinelese population is estimated at fewer than 500 individuals. If you walk onto that beach, you are carrying biological weapons they have no defense against, regardless of your intentions. The exclusion zone is not a suggestion. It is the only thing standing between a 60,000-year-old civilization and everything the modern world has ever contracted. North Sentinel Island is guarded because its inhabitants choose to be left alone. The next location is guarded because the people who run it would prefer you never ask what they are doing there. Entry 2. Area 51, Nevada, USA. The Central Intelligence Agency formally acknowledged the existence of Area 51 in August of 2013. It took the agency 41 years after the facility began operations to issue that acknowledgement. The facility is located within the Nevada Test and Training Range, approximately 83 miles northwest of Las Vegas, on a dried lake bed called Groom Lake. The official explanation is that Area 51 is a testing facility for experimental aircraft. The U-2 reconnaissance plane was developed there. The SR-71 Blackbird was developed there. The F-117 stealth aircraft was developed there. These are facts the CIA has confirmed. What the CIA has not confirmed is what the facility is currently being used for. The security perimeter extends miles before you reach the first sign. Those signs read, "Use of deadly force authorized." The guards on the perimeter are employed by a private military contractor. They drive white Jeep Cherokees and are informally called camo dudes by civilian observers who watch them from the legal boundary. They have never, in the facility's 70-plus years of operation, been publicly identified, interviewed, or required to explain their standing orders. In 1989, a man named Bob Lazar appeared on a Nevada television broadcast and claimed he had worked at a site adjacent to Area 51, designated S4, where he had reverse-engineered the propulsion systems of recovered extraterrestrial spacecraft. The government denied he had ever worked there. Freedom of Information requests later confirmed his employee badge number in Department of Energy records. The government has not explained how he obtained a badge number for a facility where he claims never to have worked. If you walk into the restricted zone today, armed personnel will intercept you before you see anything. That is the only certainty Area 51 has ever offered the public. Area 51 is guarded because of what may be hidden inside it. The next location is guarded not because of what is hidden, but because of the enormous physical countable weight of it. Entry 3, Fort Knox, Kentucky. USA. Fort Knox currently holds approximately 4,500 metric tons of gold bullion, stored in a reinforced vault beneath a structure built in 1936. That represents roughly 3% of all the gold ever mined in human history, worth more than $300 billion at current prices. It is the single largest concentration of monetary gold reserves under one roof on Earth. The vault door weighs 22 tons. It is secured by a combination lock that requires 10 separate United States Treasury security personnel to open. Each person knows only their own portion of the code. No single person in the United States government knows the complete combination. The last time an outside party was permitted to photograph the interior was in 1953, during a congressional inspection that was not repeated for another 7 decades. Senator Rand Paul introduced legislation in 2019 to mandate an independent audit of Fort Knox's gold reserves. The legislation was not passed. The U.S. Treasury conducts internal audits, but the methodology, the schedule, and the results of those audits are not public record. The gold held there is assumed to be there. It has not been independently verified by an outside party since Dwight Eisenhower was in his first term. The facility sits inside a United States Army installation with approximately 30,000 military and civilian personnel. Multiple layers of physical barriers, electronic surveillance, and armed guards operate under standing orders that permit the use of lethal force. During the Second World War, when security requirements were temporarily elevated, Fort Knox was also used to store the original United States Declaration of Independence, the Magna Carta, and the British Crown Jewels, each considered too historically valuable to leave where bombs might reach them. They were returned after the war ended. The gold has not moved. Fort Knox holds the kind of secret you can weigh, in theory. The next place holds something that cannot be measured, cannot be removed, and cannot be made safe. Entry 4, Chernobyl Elephant's Foot, Ukraine. In the basement beneath Reactor 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, there is a mass of melted nuclear fuel, concrete, sand, and structural metal that researchers call the elephant's foot. It weighs approximately 2,000 tons. It has been cooling in that basement since the night of April 26, 1986. And as of the most recent available measurements, it is still emitting radiation at levels that would deliver a fatal dose to an unprotected human being within approximately 300 seconds. When it was first discovered by cleanup crews in November of 1986, The elephant's foot was emitting 10,000 roentgens of radiation per hour. A fatal dose for a human being is approximately 500 roentgens over 5 hours. The elephant's foot could deliver that in under 3 minutes. The scientist who first photographed it, a man named Artur Korneyev, pushed a camera around a corner on a long pole to avoid direct line-of-sight exposure. The cameras themselves stopped functioning during the exposures because the radiation scrambled the electronics. The photographs he produced are among the most studied images in nuclear history. Korneyev himself has experienced significant health effects from his years of work at the site. The object is not inert. It continues to undergo slow radiological processes that make its long-term behavior difficult to predict with precision. The new safe confinement structure, a steel arch weighing 36,000 tons, completed at a cost of approximately 1.5 billion euros, was slid into position over Reactor 4 in 2016. The elephant's foot remains beneath it in the flooded basement, accessible only by robotic equipment. If you visit the Chernobyl exclusion zone today, which is permitted with a licensed tour operator and dosimeter, you will not be permitted to enter Reactor 4. You will not be permitted to access the basement. The scientists who monitored the elephant's foot have not entered the room since 1996. The radiation levels have not reached a threshold that would allow them to. Chernobyl is restricted because of what a single accident created. The next place is restricted because of what its designers created on purpose. Entry 5. Porton Down, England, UK. Porton Down is a government research facility in Wiltshire, England. It was established in 1916, making it one of the oldest continuously operating chemical and biological defense research installations in the world. It employs approximately 3,500 scientists and has an annual operating budget in excess of £600 million. The public has never been told what specific programs are currently active inside it. What the public does know is this. Between 1939 and 1989, the Ministry of Defense conducted approximately 20,000 tests on human subjects at Porton Down. Many of those subjects were British military personnel who were told they were participating in research on the common cold. Several were exposed to nerve agents, including sarin and VX, without their informed consent. A 20-year-old Royal Air Force serviceman named Ronald Madison died at the facility in May of 1953, 2 hours after a small quantity of sarin was applied to his forearm during what he believed was a medical experiment. The circumstances of his death were classified for 50 years. In 2018, a former Russian military intelligence officer named Sergei Skripal and his daughter were poisoned with a nerve agent in the nearby city of Salisbury. The British government sent samples of the substance to Porton Down for analysis. Porton Down confirmed the compound was a Novichok variant, a class of nerve agents developed in Soviet military research programs. They confirmed the chemical composition. They did not comment on whether the facility had prior knowledge of that specific compound. The perimeter at Porton Down is secured by armed Ministry of Defense police. The airspace above it is permanently restricted. The research conducted inside it remains classified. If you approach the facility without authorization, you will be stopped before you reach the outer fence. If you ask the guard what is being researched inside, he is not permitted to tell you. Porton Down guards what humans can make. The next location guards what would happen if everything humans have grown for the past 13,000 years were to disappear overnight. Entry 6. Svalbard Global Seed Vault, Norway. In 2008, a vault was cut into a sandstone mountain on the Norwegian archipelago of Svalbard, approximately 1,300 kilometers from the North Pole. It currently holds 1.3 million distinct seed varieties, representing approximately 13,000 years of agricultural development across every civilization that has grown food on this planet. If you want access to it, you must provide credentials from the depositing nation's government, approval from the Norwegian government, and authorization from the Crop Trust. the international body that administers the vault. Most requests are declined. The vault was conceived by a conservationist named Kerry Fowler after watching gene banks in developing countries be destroyed by political coups, flooding, and institutional neglect. It was designed to survive a nuclear strike, a sea level rise of 160 meters, and 10,000 years of operation without external maintenance. The permafrost surrounding the mountain was intended to serve as a passive refrigeration system that would function indefinitely without electricity. In 2017, unusually warm Arctic temperatures caused the permafrost in the entry tunnel to thaw. Water entered the access corridor. The seeds themselves were not damaged, but the passive cooling assumption was invalidated. Additional active refrigeration equipment was subsequently installed. The facility built to outlast the worst consequences of climate change was compromised by the early stages of one. In 2015, the first withdrawal in the vault's history was made. The International Center for Agricultural Research in the dry areas had maintained a seed bank in Aleppo, Syria. The Syrian civil war destroyed that facility. The Svalbard vault returned the Syrian deposit, allowing researchers to restart what the war had ended. The vault currently holds deposits from 168 nations. Access is, in all normal circumstances, refused. The seed vault guards what we eat. The next location guards what we know, and it has been deciding for 8 centuries who gets to know it. Entry 7. Vatican Apostolic Archives. Vatican City. The Vatican Apostolic Archives, historically mistranslated as the Secret Archives, a misreading of the Latin word apostolicus, contains approximately 85 linear kilometers of shelving, holding records of the Catholic Church dating back to the 8th century. Credentialed scholars may apply for access. The waiting list runs to years. The index itself, the catalogue of what the archives contain, is not publicly available. You cannot know what documents exist without first being approved to research them. The archive does not advertise its holdings. What is publicly known comes from what has been selectively released, studied under controlled conditions, or in a few cases leaked over 7 centuries of existence. The archive holds the complete correspondence between King Henry VIII of England and Pope Clement VII regarding the annulment of Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon, the refusal that triggered the English Reformation. It holds the full records of the trial of Galileo Galilei in 1633. It holds the documentation of the suppression of the Knights Templar, including the Chinon parchment, discovered misfiled in 2001, a document that suggested the Vatican had privately absolved the Templars of heresy while publicly sentencing them to execution. In 2020, Pope Francis opened the archives of the Pius XII papacy, covering the years of the Second World War and the Holocaust. 17 million documents in that collection were made available to credentialed researchers for the first time. Those researchers have spent years with them. The conclusions about what the Vatican knew when it knew it and what it chose to do remain actively disputed by serious historians. If you approach the Vatican archives without credentials, you will be turned away by the Pontifical Swiss Guard, men who have held that post in some form since the 15th century. The guards have seen a very long list of requests. They have declined most of them. The Vatican guards memory. The next location guards something the United States government spent decades pretending did not exist, while building it in the middle of Australia. Entry 8, Pine Gap, Australia. Approximately 18 miles southwest of Alice Springs, in the geographic center of Australia, there is a facility that does not appear on publicly accessible maps of Australian government installations. It is formally called the Joint Defence Facility Pine Gap. It is operated jointly by the Central Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency, and the Australian Signals Directorate. Approximately 1,000 American contractors are on site at any given time. The airspace above it is permanently restricted. Pine Gap is a signals intelligence collection facility. It intercepts satellite communications transmitted across Asia, the Middle East, and southern Russia. The data it collects is shared among the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance: the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Documents released by Edward Snowden in 2013 confirmed that Pine Gap was a primary node in the NSA's global surveillance infrastructure, contributing to programs that collected communications from millions of ordinary civilians who had no knowledge of its existence. In the 1970s, a young man named Christopher Boyce was employed as a communications clerk at a defense contractor with access to classified Pine Gap communications. He sold those documents to the Soviet Union, believing, in his own stated words, that the operations he had read about were a profound betrayal of the American values he had been raised with. He served 25 years in federal prison. The specific documents he passed have never been declassified. The operations he described have never been confirmed or denied. Pine Gap's functions during active military operations have included providing GPS targeting data for drone strikes across Pakistan, Yemen, and Afghanistan. The Australian citizens whose domestic communications were intercepted through its collection programs have no legal mechanism under Australian law to challenge that interception. The facility does not issue public reports. It does not respond to media inquiries. It does not acknowledge receiving complaints. Pine Gap listens to the world. The next location may be the most secretive attempt in modern history to survive it. Entry 9. Mount Yamantau/Medjugorje, Russia. In the southern Ural Mountains of Russia, there is a city called Medjugorje, with a registered population of approximately 18,000 people. Unlike every other city in Russia, Medjugorje is administered not by civilian local government, but directly by the Federal Security Service, the organization that absorbed the functions of the KGB following the Soviet dissolution. It is a closed city. Entry requires authorization that is almost never granted. The city exists, according to the Russian government, to support a mining operation inside the adjacent peak, Mount Yamantau, the highest mountain in the Ural Range. No mine has ever been publicly documented or verified. American intelligence agencies detected large-scale construction activity inside Mount Yamantau beginning in the early 1990s. Congressional testimony in 1997 described railroad tracks entering the mountain on satellite imagery that appeared on one side and did not emerge on the other. The construction project was assessed to have employed an estimated 10,000 workers at its peak, a workforce that continued growing for several years after the Cold War officially ended. When American officials formally raised the question with their Russian counterparts, the Russian government provided 3 separate explanations across 3 separate diplomatic meetings. The explanations were inconsistent with one another. Construction continued. The most widely accepted assessment among Western intelligence analysts is that Mount Yamantau houses one of Russia's primary continuity of government facilities, an underground complex designed to shelter the Russian leadership and command structure in the event of nuclear war. Russia's acknowledged strategic program, sometimes called Dead Hand in Western intelligence literature, includes provisions for exactly this kind of facility. What is specifically inside Mount Yamantau has never been officially disclosed. The FSB does not permit civilian approach to the mountain. Cell phone signals in the surrounding region are actively jammed. The mining operation that supposedly requires 18,000 support personnel has produced no publicly recorded output in 30 years. Russia may be hiding a bunker inside a mountain. The next location is a bunker that the United States government built, maintained for 30 years, and only admitted to when a journalist found it. Entry 10. The Greenbrier Bunker, West Virginia, USA. The Greenbrier is a luxury resort in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, operating since 1778. For 35 years, beneath its West Virginia wing, behind a blast door weighing 25 tons, was a facility designed to house the entire United States Congress during a nuclear strike on Washington, D.C. The bunker was constructed between 1958 and 1962 under the code name Project Greek Island. It contained separate dormitories for the Senate and House of Representatives, a legislative chamber designed for full congressional sessions, a communication suite, a medical clinic, a decontamination facility, and enough food and supplies to sustain 1,200 people for 60 days. The federal government paid the Greenbrier Resort to maintain the facility in operational readiness continuously, concealing it beneath the hotel as a television and telecommunications center. The resort staff who maintained it signed non-disclosure agreements they kept for decades. In May of 1992, a journalist named Ted Gupp published a detailed account of the facility in the Washington Post, its location, its purpose, its floor plan, and the identities of congressional liaisons who had been assigned to guide legislators into it in the event of a strike. The Department of Defense decommissioned the bunker within weeks of publication. The Greenbrier now offers public tours of the decommissioned facility for $9.50 per person. The blast door stands permanently open. What the United States government did not explain was where the Congressional Continuity Facility was relocated after decommissioning. A functioning successor exists. Its precise location and specifications remain classified. The emergency government apparatus it was designed to shelter has never been dismantled. America's emergency government bunker is now a tourist attraction. The next location has never offered tours of any kind. Entry 11, the Korean Demilitarized Zone, North Korean side. The Korean Demilitarized Zone is a strip of land 250 kilometers long and 4 kilometers wide, running across the Korean peninsula, established at the end of the Korean War armistice in 1953. It is the most heavily fortified international border on Earth. The South Korean side is accessible to organized tours under strict supervision on designated paths. The North Korean side has never been accessible to any foreign civilian visitor under any documented circumstances. On the North Korean side of the DMZ, approximately 1,200,000 active duty military personnel are positioned in permanent forward deployment. The North Korean military maintains artillery batteries assessed to be capable of striking Seoul, a city of 10 million people, within the range of their first volleys before any defensive intercept system could operate. Landmines in the zone are estimated at between 1 and 2 million, with incomplete mapping of their locations. In October of 2017, a North Korean soldier attempted to defect by running across the DMZ through the Joint Security Area. He was shot 5 times by North Korean forces before crossing the line. South Korean soldiers dragged him to the safety of their side. South Korean surgeons performed emergency surgery and, while operating, discovered parasitic worms in his digestive system of a type and scale that South Korean physicians had not encountered in a living patient for decades. The agricultural and nutritional conditions that produced that level of parasitic infection had not existed in South Korea since the 1960s. The soldier survived. He recovered from 5 gunshot wounds over several weeks. The recovery from the malnutrition that had made him vulnerable to that level of infection took considerably longer. He has since spoken publicly about conditions inside North Korea. His account describes a country whose population is separated from the rest of the world by something considerably more permanent than a minefield. The Korean DMZ is guarded by an entire army. The next location is guarded by something far smaller, far older, and considerably more lethal per square meter. Entry 12, Snake Island, Brazil. Approximately 90 miles off the coast of the state of São Paulo, there is a small island called Ilha da Queimada Grande. The Brazilian Navy enforces a permanent exclusion zone around it. Access for civilians requires written authorization from Brazil's Chico Mendes Institute for Biodiversity Conservation, a government body that issues those authorizations almost never. The reason is the golden lancehead viper, Bothrops insularis, a species found nowhere on Earth except on this island. The island's snake population is estimated at between 2,000 and 4,000 individual animals on approximately 110 acres of land surface. That produces an average density in the most concentrated areas of approximately 1 snake per square meter of accessible ground. The golden lancehead's venom functions differently from most pit viper venoms. It is hemotoxic, destroying red blood cells, but it also contains a unique fast-acting protein that causes tissue necrosis. The flesh around the bite site begins to break down within hours. There is no antivenom formulated to act quickly enough to be useful in the absence of immediate advanced medical care. There are no medical facilities on the island. The last lighthouse keeper stationed on Ilha da Queimada Grande, before Brazil automated the beacon, was found dead inside the lighthouse with members of his family. The account of what happened, carried by fishermen in the region for generations, holds that snakes entered through a window he had left open. Brazil's Navy maintains the automated lighthouse equipment. Personnel who service it must wear heavy protective clothing and remain on the vessel or on designated hard surfaces at all times. A physician is required to be present on the support ship throughout every maintenance visit. No one is permitted to walk on the island's natural ground surface. Snake Island is guarded by biology. The next location is guarded by one of the most powerful intelligence services on Earth. From a hilltop in rural England. Entry 13. RAF, Menwith Hill, England, UK. In the Yorkshire Dales of northern England, approximately 7 miles west of the market town of Harrogate, there is an installation belonging to the British Royal Air Force that contains 33 white spherical radomes, protective enclosures for satellite dishes, spread across a secured compound. From the surrounding hills, they resemble golf balls, arranged across a moor. This is Royal Air Force Station, Menwith Hill, and it is primarily operated by the United States National Security Agency. Menwith Hill is assessed by independent analysts to be the largest signals intelligence station in the world. The 33 radomes intercept satellite communications transmitted across Europe, Russia, the Middle East, and North Africa. The data collected there is processed and shared between American and British intelligence services under their bilateral agreement. During the Gulf War of 1991, targeting data from Menwith Hill contributed to approximately 60% of the airstrikes conducted against Iraqi military infrastructure. Documents released by Edward Snowden in 2013 confirmed that Menwith Hill was a primary processing node for NSA collection programs, including those that gathered communications data from millions of civilians in multiple countries, including the United Kingdom. British citizens have no legal standing under current UK law to challenge communications interception, conducted by their own government's intelligence services under the terms of that arrangement. The facility employs approximately 2,200 people, the majority of them American NSA contractors operating on British soil. The perimeter is secured by armed Ministry of Defence police. Photography of the compound from public roads is prohibited. The annual operating budget is classified. The British government acknowledges the facility's existence. It does not comment on its functions, its programs, or its current targets. Menwith Hill listens to the world's communications from a Yorkshire hilltop. The next location does the same, from an island in the middle of the Indian Ocean that the people who were living on it were removed from by force. Entry 14. Diego Garcia, British Indian. Ocean territory. Diego Garcia is an atoll in the middle of the Indian Ocean, roughly equidistant between Africa and Indonesia. It is approximately the shape of a footprint, 6 miles across at its widest point, and it contains a United States military installation that serves as one of the most strategically significant American bases on the planet. B-2 stealth bombers operating from Diego Garcia have flown 36-hour round-trip combat missions to Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya. The base serves simultaneously as a submarine refueling station, a pre-positioning site for military supplies sufficient to support 20,000 troops for 30 days, and a critical node in the American GPS satellite network. The previous population of Diego Garcia, the Chagosian people, several hundred families who had lived on the island for generations, were removed by the British government between 1968 and 1973 to make room for the American base. They were transported to Mauritius and the Seychelles. They were told their removal was temporary. Their pets were reportedly gassed to prevent delays. The British government informed them they could not return. The International Court of Justice issued an advisory opinion in 2019 stating that the United Kingdom's continued control of the Chagos Islands, including Diego Garcia, was unlawful under international law and that the decolonization of the region should be completed as rapidly as possible. The United Kingdom acknowledged the ruling and continued operating the base. There are currently approximately 4,500 American military personnel stationed on Diego Garcia. There are no civilians. There is no commercial air service. There is no public access of any kind. The Chagosians, now living in Mauritius, the Seychelles, and the United Kingdom, have spent 5 decades attempting to return to the island where their families are buried. They have not been permitted to do so. Diego Garcia exists to project military force. The final place on this list exists because of what happens when military force, and the industry behind it, generates waste that outlasts every human institution that created it. Entry 15. Hanford Nuclear Site, Washington, USA. 177 underground storage tanks are buried beneath the soil of the Hanford site in Washington state, along the banks of the Columbia River, on a government reservation covering 586 square miles. 67 of those tanks are confirmed to be leaking. Together, they hold 56 million gallons of radioactive and chemically hazardous waste, the largest concentration of nuclear contamination in the Western Hemisphere. The cleanup project currently underway is the most expensive environmental remediation effort in human history, with a projected total cost of $300 billion. The cleanup is not expected to be completed before 2060. Several sections of the site carry restrictions that will remain in force for the next 24,000 years. The Hanford site processed approximately 2/3 of the plutonium used in all American nuclear weapons produced during the Cold War, including the bomb detonated over Nagasaki in 1945. The methods used to store the resulting radioactive byproducts were, in their assessment of the Department of Energy's own internal reports, grossly inadequate. Contamination events were documented by workers in real time and not disclosed to the public for decades. In 2017, a tunnel collapse at a contaminated processing facility triggered a shelter-in-place order for 7,000 workers. You cannot visit the Hanford site. Access requires Department of Energy clearance issued for official purposes. Several sections will remain inaccessible to unprotected humans until approximately the year 27,024. To put that figure in terms the human mind can absorb, the ancient city of Jericho, widely considered one of the oldest continuously inhabited settlements on Earth, was first occupied approximately 11,000 years ago. When the final safety restrictions lift at Hanford, twice that much time will have passed since today. The guards on the perimeter will be long gone. The signs will still need to read, "Do not enter." From a 23-square-mile island in the Bay of Bengal that has been successfully protecting itself for 60,000 years, to a 500-square-mile reservation in Washington state that will remain dangerous for 24,000 more. These 15 locations represent the full spectrum of what humanity has decided to guard from itself. Some of these places exist to protect the world's institutions from catastrophic collapse. Some exist to conceal the methods those institutions use to build and maintain their power. Some are guarded because what is inside them, whether seed or gold or nuclear corium or intercepted communications, is genuinely too consequential to leave unsecured. And some are guarded because the humans who made the decisions that created them would prefer those decisions not be examined too closely. The men who refused to acknowledge Area 51's existence for 41 years are not fundamentally different from the guards at Menwith Hill who cannot tell you what they are protecting. The Indian Coast Guard vessels patrolling North Sentinel Island are not fundamentally different from the Federal Security Service agents who administer Medjugorje. In every case, the decision was made by some institution that the information, the material, or the people inside belonged to them and not to you. We have spent some time tonight looking at 15 of those decisions. The guards are still on post. If any of the locations we covered left you with questions you want to explore further, or if there are guarded places you believe belong on this list, let us know in the comments. We read every one. Subscribe if you want to keep asking the questions that the most powerful institutions on earth would prefer you didn't.